That headline in the Telegraph, the Boris Graph, calling it a Labour opposition, that is not really true. Because most supporters, natural supporters of an alternative to the cons, and the alternative still fragile, but still very broadly represented by the name Labour Party. So the most supporters of the Labour Party are opposed to the lifting of the or relaxing of the ban. Now we are showing about 3 papers less, the Star and the Express, and another one which is the, let's see which one is missing there. It's the I newspaper. So the Star, Express, the I newspaper, and of course the Communist Party Morning Star. Now, the Communist Party Morning Star is not available through the overwhelming majority of the outlets. And we have bought these ones from one of the very ordinary kind of outlets, that is the Sainsbury's. But even, well, there is one Sainsbury's outlet in Stratford, which is a long journey. So that is where the Morning Star is available. That's the very rare place. And some others in the central London areas. But essentially, the Morning Star has to be reserved by paying in advance, which is what we do. The outlets, because if you don't pay in advance, then they don't keep the paper, and it is not something that you can get hold of back issued very easily. Now this edition is for 7:20 GMT on Thursday, the 8th of October 2020. So we have started the headlines and the front pages. And the photograph on the Guardian's front page with two apparent quoted kind of bits. I feel perfect. Trump vows cure he took will be free to all Americans. Now that is totally shameless about turn. And this is a response to what Bernie Sanders has been saying more than anyone else. Bernie Sanders has said that Trump has been in receipt of $100 million worth of support, public support in his, quote, illness. And he is cutting the same support for the millions of Americans who need it. So that is the first occasion that we can notice and link this Trump kind of alleged vow to Bernie Sanders' criticism. It's not Joe Biden or Pamela Harris or anybody else who has said, there is a Bernie Sanders who has said that. And here is a piece in The Guardian. Next to that one, the Scotland Yard has apologized and paid substantial compensation to a man fathered by an undercover police officer who formed a long-term relationship with his mother in the 1980s in order to spy on political campaigners. So if that was 1980s, it would be, the man would be at least 30 years or plus. The Metropolitan Police has been compelled to pay the confidential sum after the man said in a lawsuit that he suffered psychiatric damage after discovering at the age of 26 that his father was not the committed left-wing protester he had been led to believe. He discovered his father, who abandoned him as a 2-year-old child, was in fact Bob Lambert, a police spy who had deceived his mother into an intimate relationship as part of an operation to infiltrate animal rights and environmental groups. Lambert's alter ego was, it goes on to page 21. Let's see what the page 21 bit says in The Guardian. That of a long-haired anarchist by the name of Bob Robinson. When his undercover stint drew to a close, he disappeared completely from the lives of his long-term girlfriend and child. Lambert has been one of the most controversial undercover officers sent to infiltrate political groups as part of a secretive 4-decade operation that has been unearthed by The Guardian over recent years. At least 2 of the police spies are known to have fathered children with activists whom they met while working undercover. The activities of the undercover officers who adopted the identities of dead children to lend their cover stories credibility are due to be examined in a much delayed public inquiry headed by a retired Judge Sir John Meeting. The inquiry, which was announced in 2014, now that was 6 years ago, by Theresa May when she was Home Secretary, is due to start hearing evidence on the 2nd of November 2020. Now 35, which is correct, as I said, this man must be over 30 years old, so he's 35. Lambert's son was given anonymity during his lawsuit, in which he was referred to as TBS. He only discovered his father's real identity by chance. Lambert was unmasked in 2011 following investigation by The Guardian and campaign groups he had infiltrated. In 2012, TBS and his mother, known only as Jackie, found out Lambert's real identity after she stumbled across an article about him in a newspaper. Until that point, Lambert had not made any move to get in touch with either of them since he vanished from their lives in 1988. The Met has previously paid £425,000 to Jackie following her legal action. She had contemplated suicide and received psychiatric treatment after discovering how she had been deceived in a police operation to gain information on activists. So this is going on, and this piece is in The Guardian. I doubt it will be in the Boris Graph or the Express or the Daily Mail, but it may be just kind of to show that they are not in total denial. And in any case, it's not them who unearthed the kind of truth. And there are other stories in The Guardian. Cummings trip review, witnesses accuse police of whitewash. Now, given that this piece about Cummings appears in the same day's edition of The Guardian that says that the Met Police have paid out a sum to the son of a police spy, this sounds kind of plausible. But when the police are given blanket coverage, positive coverage by the tabloids, that kind of story would not be plausible. It would look like treachery. And this is where the diagnosis of the media and the press brings in the essential realities about the police, the role of the police, the role of the judges, the judiciary, the licensed law traders, and members of parliament and local councils and councillors. Where is the news about the councillors in The Guardian? Nothing. And this applies even more kind of widespread kind of omission. In the case of the Times, the Boris Graph, and the other outlets like the Scum, Murdoch Scum, the Express, the Daily Star, and the other papers from Fleet Street. So the news has been stifled from the start, and it has been stifled for centuries. Hundreds of years of the newspapers and journalists in Fleet Street have been about suppressing the news of the behavior of MPs, the behavior of government ministers, the behavior of the judiciary. And in fact, the secret organizations like the Freemasons are still not reported on. And so therefore, there is a serious dysfunction inherent in the newspapers. It's not the headlines, like the headlines that they say this is absolutely superficial. This headline is like 1% of the truth. 99% of the truth is hidden and denied even by the paper that is appearing to be critical. And what they are criticizing is, major study reveals COVID rules may increase deaths. 8 in 10 with virus have no symptoms. So tighter measures have not helped in 19 of the 20 northern towns. For Britain's sake, Mail asks, so when will they listen? Now, if that is the case, then where is the actual journalism? Where are the kind of names, places, and locations, ages and genders of the people so affected and so kind of betrayed and let down and not kind of helped by the lockdown? Ministers were last night under intense pressure to rethink after experts cast fresh doubt over COVID restrictions. Research released yesterday shows that strict lockdowns, particularly those curbing the activities of the young, are unlikely to cut deaths in the long run, and may even increase them. The Edinburgh University study examined various lockdown-style scenarios and found that while they might protect hospitals, they could also prolong the pandemic and prevent the buildup of herd immunity. Now, they're talking about herd immunity. That is something that we shall be discussing at length separately. The scientists concluded that coronavirus required a different strategy from a flu epidemic, and the focus should be on shielding the elderly and the vulnerable. Unless a vaccine magically appears and is rolled out across the entire population in the next 6 months, then shutting down society is unlikely to reduce overall deaths. The computer simulation expert added, lockdowns essentially just postpone those deaths and prevent immunity building up, in some cases resulting in more deaths long term. The way out of any epidemic is herd immunity, which is when enough people in the population are infected that the virus cannot spread. Now this is herd immunity is a dangerous thing to say this is a cure. This is a dangerous thing. And so the line is now throughout the Daily Mail about the herd immunity. And they're celebrating Maureen Lipman getting a birthday honors from Brenda. And Maureen Lipman is one of the stooges of the narrative on the agenda against the Labour Party, against the alternative to the status quo. And she, along with some other core celebrities, have been used as fronts to assault the Labour Party, idea of the Labour Party, let alone the actual reality of the Labour Party. and they have been deployed to make strategically timed interventions against the Labour Party in order to divert attention from what should have been that kind of focus on that the Tories were doing wrong against society. Instead of that, they deflected attention, public attention, by intervening exactly at times and on platforms that excused and evaded kind of the responsibility of the Tories doing damage to the country and society. And there is this other corrupt kind of plug for HS2 on page 6 of the Daily Mail. And it is lamenting the kind of setback that has affected Leeds and left Leeds out of the kind of benefits, so-called, of HS2. As we have been saying for now more than 17 years, about the Crossrail agenda being put as the front for the big business agenda and big business contractors. Railway infrastructure in this country, and we said about Crossrail, mainly about London, because Crossrail was about London and parts of the suburbs, east and west. The existing infrastructure, railway infrastructure, which is roughly 200 years old, the existing railway infrastructure has been neglected for most of the 200 years. Now, the redoing of the infrastructure that exists already would cost trillions of pounds. Trillions of pounds. So the policy of the so-called state, because the London rail network, which has been mainly underground network, and some peripheral overland or overground, these are neglected as a matter of routine. And unless there is some accident or something, there is no even mention about the fact that these lines and these infrastructures exist. So when they started promoting Crossrail in language that was completely infantile and childish and totally incredible, intended for 3-year-olds who were being given a present or gift out of nowhere. That is the kind of language, hyperbole, that they used about Crossrail. Now, incidentally, that is exactly what they have been using about HS2. But back to Crossrail, and they said it was the Europe. They then recognized Europe, meaning the continental part of Europe as well. It was the Europe's biggest infrastructure project, as if they were in competition with some other country. It doesn't matter. Even if it was the biggest in terms of size and in terms of cost and in terms of time, it mattered not whether it was Europe's biggest or Britain's biggest, because Crossrail was not going to be used by Europeans, because it was based mainly in London and it was not connecting essentially with Europe. And nothing in Europe depended on what happened to Crossrail or the trips and travels and accessibility allegedly brought by Crossrail when it is completed, and it is not complete. It is not running yet. Now, we're talking about 2003 when we started campaigning against the Crossrail whole plot against Brick Lane and East London. So it's now coming to 17 plus years since the actual project was kind of mounted and mooted. What they said was that this was Europe's biggest infrastructure project, that is number one, or one of the main selling kind of propaganda things, the lines that they peddled. And then they said about Tower Hamlets, because we were strongly opposing the Crossrail alignment that was going to destroy Brick Lane and the community and in the east end of London. They employed or deployed the propaganda through the local Tower Hamlets Council with councillors making the totally bogus and stupid and ignorant claim that Crossrail is going to bring benefits to the Eastern, benefits to Tower Hamlets. Now that it needs closer, updated scrutiny. When they say it would bring benefit to Leeds, HS2, what they're making the people of Leeds, the gullibles in Leeds, to think is that that was an opportunity once in a lifetime, once in a generation, once in 100 years. It was that spectacularly novel and absolutely the cure to everything, every problem, economic, social, transport, that Leeds faced. That is how they are putting this one. And exactly that is the way that the brainwashed councillors in Tower Hamlets were primed to mouth this idiocy that Crossrail would bring benefits to Tower Hamlets. They said it in 2003, 2004, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I mean, they were saying it for years. And we were saying they were lying. We were saying that they were ignorant of what they were saying. And absolutely so. They were ignorant, they were lying. What Crossrail's benefits would actually amount to relates to property. And all the publicity and propaganda since the kind of end of the, let's say, 2007, 8, 9, let's say 10, 2010 when it started, the kind of construction, so-called. So from 2010 onwards, or even before that, outlets such as the property kind of media, property supplements and property promoters have been saying that the price of property along the lines, Crossrail, would increase, that people who were queuing up to buy properties in Whitechapel and in Stepney and in other parts that are, affected by Crossrail line, and in the west as well, west of London, and they were saying the same thing. They said the same thing about Abbey Wood in South London, where it is going from Canary Wharf, and that is the benefit. Now that's not a transport benefit, you morons. That is property speculation benefit, and that is a segregation, an aggravation to the already critically unavailable and unprovided housing to the millions of people that need housing. So if the property market is raised along the Crossrail line, then that is not a benefit, it's a deficit, it's a loss to the communities. Now, how many times can campaigners say this to already well-funded machine of propaganda that is the local council? No individual campaigner could spend the time or have the resources to counter every incidence of the lies that a council could perpetrate and promote. And that is what they did. But they are exposed as liars, not only about Crossrail, but on everything else. We'll be talking about updates on Brick Lane being blocked by the diminutive John Biggs. And we shall be commenting on the silence of the local councillors from the wards affected by the blockage. And it's not just a blockage of Brick Lane, it's the blockage of other parts of Tower Hamlets areas where people are absolutely genuinely concerned for the environmental factors involved. But blocking Brick Lane is not going to change the environment for the better if the whole list of impacted issues are addressed, and all the other losses that are being increased and caused by the blockage are being examined and addressed, and actually the necessary compensations paid and the damages kind of dealt with. And when we talk about this Guardian coverage of the Metropolitan Police paying and the Guardian piece about witnesses that have been criticizing Dominic Cummings, we talk about the culture, the dominant culture in the mainstream, in the media, in the politics, in parliament, of no accountability. That is the dominant culture, and that is the narrative, that there is no accountability to the public. Just like they are now admitting every day, every single day, the coverage, including today's coverage on the coronavirus. There are 2 pages on pages 8 and 9 on the Daily Mail. And it is saying, frighteningly, it's saying that the rules will be killing more people. Now, this is for the gullibles, because the Daily Mail is also saying that herd immunity should be encouraged. Now, herd immunity means more people dying. By definition, herd immunity means more people getting infected. And by definition, the more people get infected, the more numbers die. So where is the actual evidential transparency and truthfulness? Because the Daily Mail and the others who are saying that the kind of lockdown would be doing more damage than good, they are not saying all the details that we have been saying on this program from the beginning, that they are not saying, the newspapers, Fleet Street are not saying A to Z. They are not describing every stage of the contract and every stage of the infection and every stage of the kind of spreading and the contracts. What are the contracts? What kind of contracts? Because there are millions of types of contracts among people. And that has not been explained. That has not been even listed. That has not been even mentioned. What they say is just numbers of people affected, infected. That is what they are doing wrong. And they're not doing journalism. That's not the basic thing, as used to be the case on the so-called novice on learner journalists, is few things like the what, where, when, why, how, These questions are basic to journalism. That is to say, finding the information and sharing and serving the information excessively to the people who buy the paper, buy the product for that information. But they're not doing that. It's like a priority is not on the evidence. Priority is not on the facts. Whatever the facts and whatever the evidence should be there. It's the priority is on the agenda, like the politically motivated agenda as to which one would carry how many people's gullibility behind them. And that is dangerous and irresponsible to the people affected, which is the whole society, most of the people anyway. So they're saying that 10 million facing pub closures in the pandemic hotspots. And there is a piece in the Daily Mail again. Is this what explains COVID North-South divide? And then there is another one, the soaring virus cases where strict curbs are in force. But they're still not giving the counts as to the contacts, the stages from A to Z. What are the stages that the virus travels? And what are the stages that are actually lethal, avoidable, and what are the ones that are not avoidable? And what are the impact of any kind of medical intervention. Quite apart from the lockdown, what are the medical or health interventions? And what is day to day the latest maximum consensus on what steps worldwide that are taken as being effective? There is no such table, there is no such display, there is no such recognition or reporting in any of the papers. So that is the diagnosis that we are making of these newspapers that are sickly unfit to call themselves journalists or journals. And then there is this other piece about the cost of hiring COVID cops. They are saying that 60 million pounds to hire more COVID cops. That is to, like this they are showing the COVID cops near the crowds. So the Daily Mail has got today's Daily Mail, that is Thursday, the 8th of October 2020. The Daily Mail has got front page splash, that is called a splash, that covers the main front page. That is the splash, big letters. And so they've got page 1, 2, and then 3 about Trump, his miracle cure. Trump is now become a preacher man. The serial adulterous and sexually abusive liar is now pretending to be a preacher man, a man of God. He says that he's got a cure by miracle. So that they've got 4, page 1, 2, 4, and then page 8, 9, double page spread on the, then 10, 11, pages 10, 11, page 12, 13, and page 14, rare picture acknowledgement of the existence of Labour Party, because he's actually supporting their line. He is against the lockdown. So Starmer is given a kind of reluctant mention on page 14. And then there's the editorial on page 18 on the Daily Mail. And Stephen Glover on page 11, repeating the same thing by relying on referring to scientists, saying that there is a better way to deal with this. And they're still celebrating Boris the Miracle Man, the magician who will make Britain walk in a week's time out of any contract with European Union. Now here is the page 27, where there is a rare piece about NHS doctors misleading children about gender drugs. Now remember what we said about the role of the Royal London Hospital in Whitechapel. The Royal London Hospital tried for months to murder a child from Newham, Bangladeshi parents, but the hospital tried to murder this child under cover of medical expertise. And because the parents were determined to stop the murder, the parents fought effectively a court battle until they got permission from the court in London, which is a rare thing because these are two Bangladeshi parents, and the court normally would give a ruling in favor of the racists in any equation. That is the norm. 99.9% of the cases in the English judiciary is ruled against Bangladeshis or Pakistanis or Indians, and most certainly against Muslims. These Bangladeshi parents were Bangladeshi Muslims. So it was very rare, and the rarity is explained by the fact that their lawyers were actually white people mainly. And this is the syndrome that Sayeda Warsi kind of gave credibility to in a memo or in a leaked kind of communication to one of our colleagues in the Muslim conservative or Muslim kind of circle. She said, use the blonde leverage. That is to say, using a white blonde female as a cover, as a front, helps the cause, as opposed to hindering the cause if the actual claimant or if the actual party involved in the communication or activities were telling the truth about their identity, like they're Muslims or Asians or Africans. So that's the blonde leverage. And this is slightly different angle, but effectively shows the same utility or usefulness that can be attached to a white front and white skin front. That shows how deep the racism in this country is. When Diane Abbott decried the blue-eyed blondes. And that is the truth about this society. And the truth is completely unaddressed by Corbyn, the so-called kind of left-wing revolutionary socialist. And Corbyn became the garden gnome in my language, precisely because he did not engage with the evidence in society. And despite the fact that his demonizers call him a Palestinian, Corbyn is not a Palestinian in any shape or form. Corbyn is contemptuous of the Palestinians as any other racist is. And Corbyn has never said anything, not once, in any public statement about Palestinians possessing intellectually, spiritually, historically, empirically, any exclusive and superior knowledge about their own struggles than any of the left-wing racists posing as friends of the Palestinians. And Corbyn, to this day, it is 6 months now, since April, May, June, July, August, September, 6 months since he left. Corbyn has not updated, let alone made any comprehensive statement about what he thinks of racism. Now, if Corbyn, who was promoted by the likes of Tariq Ali and others as the first socialist leader of the Labour Party, including the playwright, the man who is overly Ken Loach, who is overly promoted as a rare thing called a socialist kind of playwright in this country. If Corbyn praised to the stratospheres by the likes of Ken Loach as the best socialist leader Labour Party had ever had, then the fact that Corbyn has remained silent on racism shows that the Labour Party is definitively a racist party. And that is true of every other leader of the Labour Party, as I have been saying. I mean, the most obscenely, grotesquely, brazenly racist leaders have been Gordon Brown and James Callaghan. Gordon Brown joined Callaghan decades later when he went to visit Africa and defiantly said that he was not going to apologize for the empire. It would be interesting to see what Gordon Brown has to say about the movement that includes Black Lives Matter. I don't call Black Lives Matter a movement because I have been saying the same thing for decades before this thing was conjured up. So it's not news to me, but the essential fact is that it is part of a movement. And the movement has been ongoing for the last, 60 years. I say 60 years because I date the actual starting with the Notting Hill racist attack by the police and the police going around on the nigger hunt, as Joe Hunt, spelled with an Hunte, put it, because Joe Hunt at that time was an activist, newly arrived activist from the Caribbean. And 10 years later, I had the kind of coincidental reason to have meetings with him when I found him completely playing a different role. Not saying that racism didn't exist, but he was doing the career bit then. By the time in the 70s, when I sat down with him over many months, over several years, until he left the job he was doing as the race relations post holder in Tower Hamlets at the expense of the anti-racist campaigns. Joe Hunt was completely different, playing different role. Now that is again the subject of a longer, detailed examination, another seminar talk by me, or talks. Essentially, what I'm saying is that the basic facts and evidence of fighting racism, the denial of racism, has been part of the identity and the profile of the Labour Party and its leadership. And the fact that Corbyn was praised to the highest spheres on the stratosphere by his bots and organized kind of mob of ignorant people who completely misunderstood society and still do. Corbyn did a great deal of disservice over the 5 years to the cause of fighting racism. Look at his record. There is nothing. Look at his broadcasts for which he was paid by the Iranians. There is nothing about anti-Muslim racism. We do not have to depend on Iran to understand what is going on in the world. But Iran became part of the narrative in the demonizers' kind of vocabulary. They had to mention Iran, and that's it. As soon as they mention Iran, it goes all the way back to Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan had called the Iranians and the North Koreans Looney Tunes. Now, Trump is not a Ronald Reagan for various reasons, but Trump he focused on what Ronald Reagan said on a number of things, or his kind of advisors. Because Trump is manifestly a stupid person, a corrupt, ignorant person. So whatever he mouths and utters are actually created for him by others. He is, of course, personally very ignorant and very prejudiced and racist, and in the darkness most of the times on most issues. But when Reagan called Iran the biggest threat on the face of the earth, he wasn't talking literally about the regime or the country being the biggest threat on the face of the earth at the time. The whole elaborate, detailed lying that the Reagan administration committed and perpetrated showed the obsession that can be caused by anti-Muslim and racist hostility. I mean, Reagan did the biggest disservice to the cause of peace by demonizing Iran instead of advocating the need for peace in the world. And Trump, by definition, is doing 10 times as much damage by his activities and behavior and his illegalities. Reagan was a right-wing, reactionary, racist, anti-Muslim warmonger, but he wasn't a brazen violator of the Constitution, as Trump is. But this is something coming from the Khoodeelaar campaign in East London. This should have come from the leadership of the Labour Party over the last 5 years. This is coming to you because we have been studying, examining the evidence, and we have been engaged with the world of facts and evidence. And the leadership of the Labour Party has not been engaged with the world of facts and evidence. And that is why Callaghan was a very stupid person, because he didn't read. If he read, it was a private affair. He didn't come across as having read the necessary stuff or the amount. Same case with Gordon Brown, because Gordon Brown had a kind of spin machine working overtime for him, suggesting that he was well read and everything. Well, he might have been well read according to those kind of spin machines. But what he said in substance about what matters, and in this context, it is racism, empire, imperialism, and the overdue need to do repairs for the damage done by racism, empire, and imperialism. Brown didn't come across as having read the stuff, read the facts of the impact and the implications of racism and empire and imperialism. That's what I'm saying. And what is happening with the legacy of Corbyn is that the fantasists who spun for Corbyn are in denial as well. Now, we never got taken. I mean, I personally don't have any reason to be taken in by Corbyn, because in 1981 or 82, it couldn't be more later than 1983. At a rally in Altavali Park, I was the speaker before Corbyn. So I spoke on a microphone, and whatever I said about the issue under reference, which was obviously racism, I gave a speech for maybe about 2 minutes or 3 minutes at most, not longer than 3 minutes, because I'm always conscious of other people waiting and also of the patience of the crowd. So I don't make a long speech at a rally like that. So when I finished, and I had to literally give the microphone to Jeremy Corbyn, and he said very quietly something that I had not expected. He said, "I wish I could speak like you." Not only did I not expect it from him, because that was my first physical person-to-person encounter with him, but it instantly brought back memories of about 5-6 years previously, when in 1977, at the Tooting kind of base of the Wandsworth Borough Council, there was a meeting, public meeting, where maybe 4 persons spoke from a platform. It was a very small meeting in a room, and I was one of the 4 persons speaking. If it was 4, that would be the maximum. It could have been 3, but I'm just being kind of careful in case there were more than 3 persons. So I spoke before Ken Livingstone spoke, and I had not met him until that event. That was 77. So when I finished, Livingstone said, "I wish I could speak like you." And so when Corbyn said that same sentence a few years later, I was struck, because for years before I met either of them, I had been studying Thomas Babington Macaulay. And I had been keenly looking for evidence of English people, not Dutch, Scottish, or French or German, English people, because Macaulay was the English kind of parliamentary person in the 1830s. And I was looking for evidence, hints, signs of English people and their attitude towards people from the subcontinent, including my patch of the subcontinent. And I had not seen any acknowledgement of any intellectual ability, wisdom, philosophy, morality, ethics on the part of the people from the subcontinent in anything any English person had said, except two persons. One, Tagore, and the other, M.K. Gandhi. Now, both of them were recognized because of other things, not because of themselves and their original kind of contributions at the time. And I noticed they most certainly never ever wanted to mention the leader, Netaji Subhash Bose, who, if there was a leader in the subcontinent, would be my leader. So I was very concerned, not flattered, not pleased in the least, either by Livingstone saying, I wish I could speak like you, or Corbyn years later saying the same thing to me. In fact, it came across as racist and totally kind of defensive, because obviously they had been affected by my speech, whatever it was in my speech that they were affected by, but they were affected by the fact that I spoke in a way that they noticed, which means that they didn't notice anyone else. Well, because I don't know whether they had said anything similar to anybody else from the subcontinent. But my belief is that they wouldn't have come across many. Well, I know that for a fact. They wouldn't have come across many, because most of the people who are, quote, generally speaking, articulate and make coherent sense in a speech and are from the background, from the subcontinent, their agenda is not as emphatically independent of the Macaulay narrative as mine is. So they accommodate. So therefore, when they accommodate, they are patted on the back. Patted on the back, not noticed. Patted on the back. And this is the case with the entire career of Ken Lying Still Livingstone. The reason I call him Lying Still is because very early on, I noticed that he was a liar. So this is the diagnosis, still the diagnosis of the Fleet Street media today, Thursday, the 8th of October, 2020. But I'm covering a lot of ground and a lot of years. In fact, a lot of centuries. I'm going back to the 1830s and Thomas Babington Macaulay. And what I'm saying here about K.R. Starmer being given a reluctant admission by the Daily Mail on page what? It's either to page 24 or page 14. Let's see if my memory is serving me. Yes, it's page 14. Henry Deeds is doing another kind of servile peddling for Bon Johnson. And they're kind of diminishing the impact of Starmer. Now, as will be obvious to anyone watching this, my view of Keir Starmer is not very high. But when it is compared, the role of Starmer compared with the role of Johnson, and they say that he's doing blustering. That shows their prejudice against the Labour Party, against the opposition, against democracy. That is what I object to. So even though I am not a fan of Starmer's, which I cannot be because the evidence of my contacts with him or contacts to his office while he was the Director of Public Prosecutions 9 years ago, trying to prevent serious crimes taking place in Tower Hamlets, my experience shows that Starmer was not in post. Although he was called the Director of Public Prosecutions, he was not there to prosecute criminals or to mainly run the Crown Prosecution Service against crime and criminality. And of course, he was, if as a result of the information my organization gave to him, anticipating various criminal activities that did take place, as I was communicating and my campaign groups were communicating to him, because it's not one campaign group, several campaign groups I coordinate and I run, and I was running at the time. He might have, or his kind of subordinates or line managed or line mismanaged personnel might have contacted some of the criminals, because our communications gave the DPP the names of the criminals, the addresses of the places and scenes of crime, and the potential scenes of crime or potential scenes of the likely commission of crimes. If he or they did communicate or contact with those criminals who were all racists, they would have understood that the source of the information came from or was mainly manned and woman by people who were not white or who were not European. So therefore, Starmer would have been prejudiced against taking any action based on the truthful information that we had given him. And as any diligent, attentive viewer and student of this program would have noticed by now, the damages they caused, the criminals were committed, the damages were caused mainly in two periods. So the periods where the commission of the crimes were in September 2011 and July to October 2012. And the still increasing but estimated cost of the losses and damages can begin at several billions of pounds. That is, it exceeds, as we have said, the known combined personal wealth of all four of the billionaires, all Americans: Zuckerberg, Bezos, Gates, and Musk. Because the work that was damaged, has been damaged, has been about saving lives of hundreds of millions of people. Take a pause. Hundreds of millions of people. It's bigger than all the work that the United Nations has done. And I'll tell you why. It's not as difficult to comprehend as it may sound. Because the theory is like a completely unique mathematical theory, mathematically pure theory of saving the world, saving humanity, saving the planet. It's like a worldwide movement that doesn't cost anyone anything, but benefits everyone to any amount. And it is not based on prejudice. It's based on complete absence of prejudice, opposite of prejudice. It is a universally understood love for the world, for humanity, for the planet, for the environment. So it is 1,000 times more effective and more phenomenal and more influential than Greta Thunberg has done. Take a pause and think about this. That is what Keir Starmer failed to intervene in defending and protecting from criminal attacks. So if he can be held to any extent liable, imagine the liability. It is 1,000 times more damaging than the loss of one general election in Britain. So we shall be continuing in part B.